right now.
Okay, my name is Ann Regan Grissom. I'm a student at St. George's Independent School. Today I'm interviewing Mr. Richard Klenz. It is March 21st, 2018, and we are at St. George's Independent School. Okay, so we can kind of do this however you would like to.
However you'd like. Yeah.
Okay, if you want, you can just tell the story or we can ask questions.
Okay. You want me to talk about my career in the Army?
Yes, basically
Okay.
where it all started, getting drafted, and then everything through the Korean War.
Okay, I graduated from high school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the end of 1950. At the end of 1951, I got notified that I was going to get drafted. And I was in the January of 1952. I went to, at that time they called it Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, which is not too far from here actually. It's on the other side of Arkansas.
Okay.
And I took my basic training and graduated from there sometime in the late spring, I believe. I got to go home again, and then they put me on a train and took me to Seattle, Washington, and then onto a ship. And about 2 weeks we crossed the Pacific and landed in Japan. They gave me a rifle and 3 bullets to zero it in, which I thought was kind of strange. And then I got on another ship and sailed to Korea, and that was just a day. And there again I got on a train, a very primitive train. It seemed like to me the seats were all hard, and it was full of other Army people like I was. And didn't know where I was going, but through the night we traveled somewhere, and I got into a what they call a replacement depot, and there I was assigned to a it was called an armored artillery battalion. And I got on a truck and they took me to where they were encamped, and I met my compatriots in a squad tent, which is a large tent that sleeps about 20 people actually. And I began my career as a cannoneer. I don't know if you're familiar with the artillery, but it's a big gun. And in this particular battalion, they were mounted on a track. It kind of looked a little bit like a tank, but it's not a tank. It's a self-propelled artillery piece. And I spent from whenever I got there, I think it was in June sometime in 1952, I spent the next year, a little over a year actually, until they signed the peace truce with the Koreans, North Koreans. I started out as they call a cannoneer, and I learned how to load the shell into the gun, and how to put the powder behind it, and how to put the igniter in it, and I graduated to be able to pull a lanyard at one time and fire the gun. And I then got promoted to corporal and became the gunner. That was the person that aimed the cannon. And sometime in the early part of 1953, I became the sergeant, and I was in command of the crew that worked on the gun. We fired a lot. We were supporting the infantry, both American and South Korean infantry. We were not in the sight of the enemy. We were back far enough where they couldn't see us. And we responded to the directions of a forward observer who was our forward observer, and they would pick out targets and send back coordinates that we entered into the gun sight and would fire. I guess to explain it to you, the guns are set up on sort of a compass basis, so that all the guns are lined up. There's 6 guns in a battery, and they're lined up, and you don't aim at anything outside of a red and white pole, and that puts you where you wanted to be. And that resulted from getting the directions from the Fire Direction Center. You set that in the sight, and you turn the gun to line up on this pole, which was a compass point, so that all the guns pointed the same way.
Was it pretty accurate?
Hmm?
Was it pretty accurate? Like the aiming?
Well, not as accurate as they are today.
Yeah.
Because now they use GPS, and they don't miss much of anything, I guess, when they fire. We fired a lot. As a matter of fact, in 1953, in one 24-hour period, we kept firing, and the battalion fired 9,500 rounds in a 24-hour period. That's all of the batteries. There are 3 firing batteries in the battalion. I think interesting facts. I should add, a few times we got shot at. I mean, the North Koreans or Chinese, whoever were out there, were fired. And when that happens, you can't hide. You've got to start firing your gun too, so you can quiet them down. And that's what happened a few times that they shot at us. Fortunately, nobody in our battery was hit or anything else, so we all thank the Lord for that. I think is interesting, when the Korean War broke out, President Truman had signed executive orders to integrate the military. Up until that time, in those days they said Negro or colored units were separate from white ones. And during the Korean War, I think it was in 1950 or 51, before I got to Korea, they integrated it and they added whites and blackness units, so that the first time in the history of the United States that there was an integrated military working together. So I thought that was kind of neat. I think it's neater as the years have gone by, and I understood it better. And let's see, what else can I tell you about it? During my stay in Korea, we were in North Korea. Our unit was. Probably, I guess you know that the North and South Korea are separated by the 38th parallel. We were in sort of a hump that went up north of the 38th parallel. So we could fire in several directions because the enemy was to the left, the right, and to the front of us. Let's see. That's about it. I do remember there was a lot of course, for us it was just rumors and scuttlebutt, but they were meeting with the North Koreans, and that went on for about 6 months before they signed a truce. And of course, when they signed the truce, we were in the wrong place. We had to go back below the 38th parallel, and that became the demilitarized zone, which is still there, and we've still got soldiers over there guarding against attacks and so on. And as you know, the president's going to go over and speak to the leader of North Korea. I think he's going to. Yeah.
What it says.
Yeah.
What was it like being in North Korea? Like, especially like how it is now. It's like very.
I thought the weather was very much like my home state of Wisconsin. It snowed. It got cold. It was not too bad in the summertime. The place we were located for most of the time I was there was sort of hilly, forested, except for we fired a lot. Then it became one of the hills out there they called Old Baldy because there was nothing left on it, I guess, when we got through. There were, I think, 3 or 4 major campaigns when I was there, and they would give names to them. The winter, or the last winter, the first winter, and all that kind of stuff, you know. That's about it. After I stayed there about a month after they signed the truce, and then I was rotated back home. And that's my story.
That's awesome. Okay, I have a few questions. You said when you became the cannon person, you were taught how to use it. Do you remember any of your instructors, like, specifically, or how they, like, treated you? Or, like, if they, like, I mean, just how they really instructed you?
I remember a couple of my compatriots there. One guy's name was Loveless, his name was.
Loveless.
Another guy was Willie. And you just learned on the job. They would, when you started firing, they'd tell you to take the... I'm trying to remember what the first thing I did was, but the howitzer that we were firing was a 155 millimeter, which is about 6 inches in diameter, and they weighed about 95 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
And generally, you'd load it. Well, the shells were 95 pound, and they were separate from some of the other parts. When you got ready to fire, they would tell you what kind of a fuse they wanted on it, so that when I reached the target, either it blew up on contact, or it hit the ground and dug in and then blew up. And they had some fuses that were it sent a signal. When they got so close to the target, they would blow up in the air. And that had to be screwed into the top of the round, because when we got the rounds, they were dismantled. So we would put the right kind of fuse on. That was probably the first thing I did, screw it in. And then they would tell you, when the command came down, they would tell you how much powder you needed to send the projectile as far as they wanted it to go. So those were powder bags. There were bags about like this, and they were sections, so you could take them apart and use 1 charge, 2 charges, or 5 charges, whatever they said. And that would be 2 people would normally take the round on a little tray and lift it up to the breech and take a pole and jam it in there, and then the powder would go in behind it, and then they would close the back of the cannon, and then they would put looked like a shell on a little gizmo that turned and screwed into the back. And when you pulled the lanyard, the little hammer came up and hit that little shell. That would set the powder off, and the powder would send the shell through the air. So I learned all those little things that you had to do. Pick it up and load it, and put the powder in, and do this and the other thing.
I guess after doing it so much.
And there
like,
were some guys that had been there for a while that showed you how to do it.
Mm-hmm. And they're typically nice with the new people.
Yes, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, they were very nice, yeah. It was a little scary when I first met them, because it was a rainy night, and they were all sitting in the tent glaring at me, you know. But they were all nice guys, for the most part.
That's awesome. Okay, you said that y'all got shot at. Did that happen more than once, or was that one-time thing?
Oh, it was probably 3 or 4 times it happened, yeah.
How did you feel when, like, witnessing that?
I felt like I was about 8 feet tall, and you want to be small when you hear the noise, yeah.
You want to just hide,
Yeah.
but even though you couldn't hide because you had to shoot back, and I guess it's kind of scary.
But I remember feeling very big, and at least I was smaller.
What did you do for recreation when you were off duty?
Well, we did play a little sports. I remember throwing a baseball around and a football once in a while. Of course, you had to maintain the weapon, that had to be cleaned and oiled and all that sort of thing. And then you were receiving ammunition. Well, it kept you pretty busy. There was not a lot of downtime. So.
Okay. And then we didn't really talk about when you came home. How were you received by your family and the community?
Just fine. It was nothing like Vietnam. I mean, people were very friendly. Matter of fact, I remember on a train going out there, we stopped in Montana someplace, and I got off the train, and of course I quickly found a bar so I could get a drink. And I walked in my uniform, and several people wanted to buy me a drink. So awesome. It was everybody was pleasant. When I got home, of course, I didn't. There were no crowds or anything. My family was glad I got back, and
then how did you readjust, going back to a regular life from after going?
I didn't really have any trouble adjusting. I had a little trouble finding a job for a while, but.
What did you end up doing after?
I started working for the post office, and that's the reason I'm living in Memphis now. I started out as a letter carrier, and then I applied to become a postal inspector, which I know you don't know what that is, but it's the post office's federal law enforcement organization. So I ended up investigating things and arresting people, also inspected many little post offices. And I ended up actually getting sent to, I left Milwaukee and started out in Duluth, Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And I was transferred to St. Paul. And then I got a chance to go to Washington as an instructor in the inspector training school. And then I got a job at the Inspection Service headquarters, at Postal headquarters in Washington. And then they sent me down here for less than a year, and we left some of our kids here. Mm-hmm. So that I got sent back to Washington, and I got sent to San Francisco.
It's kind of all over
and
the
that's
place.
where I retired, and then we actually moved back to Washington for a few years, and then we, because some of our kids were here, we finally moved down here.
Mm-hmm. Have you remained in contact with or reunited with any of your friends or the rest of the veterans that you fought with?
Well, actually, yes. They found me. Several of them started a retired. It was the entire battalion, and they located people through military magazines and stuff. And I finally found out about it, and I started going to the meetings. They'd try to get together once a year, and it was kind of strange because during the war I was in one battery on one gun, and those are the people I knew the best.
Spent all your time with.
But this was a whole battalion, which there were firing batteries, A, B, and C. They're in different places, and then there was a service battery that supplied ammunition and supplies, and then there was a headquarters battery. So people from all those batteries were in this retired group. And then, of course, the length of time was larger than the war. There were people in there that came when the war started, and they lasted until about 1955, a few years after the war, before those guns were retired and sent to Japan. And one of them told me they melted them down and made cars out of them. So another interesting thing I found out then, one of them, matter of fact, the gentleman who replaced me on the same gun after I was long gone, said he worked on atomic weapons for the guns, which of course was after I was around.
That's cool though.
He said he couldn't talk about it then, but now he can.
Now he tells you
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, we have a few questions about just like your reflections, like after being in the war. How did your wartime experiences affect your life?
Yeah, I can't say there was much effect. I knew that war was a bad thing when I got back. Matter of fact, this little book I tells you how many people were killed there. It's just terrible thing to do. When you take people, of course, being drafted, I wasn't interested in a military career, although I did think about it once or twice. And they put a bunch of people together and shoot at each other. It's just kind of a dumb thing to be doing. It really never solved anything, and so I never thought about it at the time. It was just something that happened to you. You had to go, and you did it. And I guess I was sort of had a little pride in getting promoted to sergeant, and not as much pride as I probably should have, but because during the Korean War, people rotated in and out, so the guys who were sergeants left, so they had to make more sergeants. So, and I was one of the, probably lucky more than anything else.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then what message would you like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview? Do you have like anything that you want to say to the people who might see this?
Yeah, work hard to stay out of wars. They're not a good thing to happen at all. I would guess that the military training is another thing. It's I think it helps you with your discipline. They teach you to obey orders. I hate to call it brainwashing, but it's sometimes necessary to. You don't want people ordering you to attack, and you saying, "I don't want to go."
Right.
So, but it's a good experience that way. The war itself was a experience I'll never forget. I'd never want to go do it again, though, ever again.
Do you think it like kind of changed your outlook of like just like wars in the future, like that they shouldn't happen, like?
Well, I think that's
Yeah.
that's my thinking right now.
Really do. I mean, they don't really help
No.
that much. It's just a bunch of people shooting at each other.
Yeah. So, and of course, the draft, of course, gave a common experience to a lot of people in the same age group, which doesn't happen today anymore. It was sort of a rite of passage in those days, so many young men in those days had that military training, and it was something you could relate to other people, lots of people. Not so much anymore.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Yes, it is.
Although the training was probably helpful.
Well, is there anything that you feel like we haven't discussed that you would like to talk about or share with us?
No, I don't think so. Unless you want to make maybe I don't know how much information you've got, but this little booklet was put together by one of our retired guy's daughters, and it's a history of the unit that we were in. But there's a lot of war statistics in here. I'll show you quick.
That's really awesome that she put that together, because I'm sure.
Yeah, this is a page that kind of just talks about the Korean War, and it's got some statistics in it. And here's some of the gruesome statistics here. People killed.
That's so many people.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And this, of course, is kind of a chronological order of the war itself. They start on June 25th when the North Koreans came across the border, and this tells all the events in 50, 51,
And what year were you drafted again?
Huh? I was drafted at the beginning of '52, so I got over there about June or July. I was probably here when this started all the way to let's see, Korean War signed here on July 27th. I was there about a month after this year.
So you were there for like a little over
So
a year.
a lot of these things were happening when I was there. Not necessarily where I was, but they were in Korea.
So you were there for a little over a year.
Yes. Yeah.
What was it like during like holidays and stuff? Like,
It was great. We had special dinners.
really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Like for Christmas and stuff.
As a matter of fact, some of these are pictures that this young lady who put this together and they have. She's got a little history, and she had pictures from. These are from the guys who attended the retired guys' meetings. You know, they did a little thing here with some of the pictures.
Oh, like did a little thing about each person?
Yeah. And there's a bunch of, there I am right there.
Wow.
That's when I had
Awesome.
a lot of hair and I could hear better and stuff like that. But there's a bunch of other pictures that are by the batteries. That was the battery I was in, and I only recognized a few people because there were so many of them there. Well, another interesting thing was they assigned Korean soldiers to our unit.
Really?
So we had, there were three Koreans that I got to know pretty good that were there. Two of them were, one was kind of a seasoned guy. He was there when I got there. And there were two kind of young guys that showed up. Matter of fact, this little guy right here looks like one of them, but I can't really tell from there.
Oh my gosh. That's cool.
But then they have several pictures from each battery.
So you were an A? You were an A?
I was
So
an
was it
A,
by
yeah.
letter?
Yeah. I think this guy might have been one of the senior ranking guys. He was like the
Like top dude?
first sergeant, yeah.
That's cool.
This guy here has passed away. I met him and the retired guy. He was there when I was there, actually. I think, I'm not sure if this was the guy, but one of the guys that I met later in retirement was a wire. He was a wire specialist. He hung telephone wires and stuff. He fell off a telephone pole. I still remember that. He was laid up for a while.
Wow.
But I met him again when the old guys got together. As a matter of fact, the last time they got together was here in Memphis. I was in charge of arranging a reunion for them.
Where was it?
It was great. In a way, it was great. It was interesting because there were about 30 people showed up, but most of them were families and children and wives and so on. There's probably 10 or 12 veterans there. And there must have been 6 people that attended it that had Alzheimer's, so you can kind of see the age group that you're dealing with. But we met in a hotel over at Hacks Cross and Winchester, or a little by the freeway where the the Sam Cooper, not the Sam Cooper, the 385, whatever it is, yeah. Then I took them on a bus trip that had a musician on. Have you ever done that?
What is that?
Oh man, that's great. I'm trying to think of the name of the organization. But they have a singer on the bus, and they tour.
That's awesome.
They tour Memphis, and usually, well, the guy I've went with there at that time on the bus, he knew where every musician lived, Elvis Presley, and spoke about all those people, and he played songs and sang. Well, yeah.
Awesome. I've never heard of that before. I didn't know
It's on the website. I want to say Big Bus or.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's such a
It's a great trip, though. I recommend
And
it.
just go around Memphis.
Yeah, they drive around in
That's awesome.
Memphis, yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
I've never heard of
and they point stuff out and tell stories and
That's
play
cool that y'all
music.
got to do that.
They let you sing if you want. It's great.
So did some of the veterans come from out of town? Or-
Yeah, they're from all over the country, but we didn't have many of them. But some were from my hometown of Milwaukee, so
Really?
that was kind of neat. But I kind of think that's the last one we're going to have. It's getting near the end of the road for all those folks. Not me, but for all those older people.
All right. Is that y'all have any questions or anything?
Okay.
I think that's good.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming and talking to us again.
Yeah, it's okay.
Got all the questions down that we needed. Got signatures. You know about the